Afternoon, folks. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School, and I'm back out here today for an AAR on Season 1, Episode 2 of Extracted. So real fast before I get to this week's AAR, let me clear up a few confusions that may be out there as far as the names Pathfinder, Self-Reliance Outfitters, the Pathfinder School, and those type things. The Pathfinder brand is owned by Self-Reliance Outfitters. And the Pathfinder School owns Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder brand. They are all the same entity. The brand is called Pathfinder. That's why our logo says Pathfinder underneath it of our gear. But it's sold through Self-Reliance Outfitters and other retailers as well. So if you're looking for gear from Extracted or other survival or self-reliance or bushcraft gear in general, you can find it at selfrelianceoutfitters.com, the home of the Pathfinder brand. If you want training in survival, self-reliance, bushcraft, navigation, folk skills, primitive skills, you can come to the Pathfinder School, and you can find those classes also at selfrelianceoutfitters.com under the training tab. Now, let's talk about Extracted for a minute and get back to our AAR After Action report of Episode 2, Season 1. So the first few minutes of last night's episode were really a recap of Episode 1, kind of showing you the dynamic between the contestants and their support group back at base camp, the dynamic between the interactions of people at base camp, the different people that were there interacting with each other. Of course, the contestants don't have any interaction with anyone other than hearing things over speakers that they're told. So the only thing that I probably would point out in Episode 1 and going into Episode 2 is that if you are the support group for someone who is in the woods to do a survival scenario with limited gear, it is really your job to make it as easy on them as humanly possible, especially if you want them to last the longest and in the end get to $250,000. So what you do, the decisions you make, and what gear you send, what deals you make, and all those type things come into play very heavily, but the person who suffers the consequences is the contestant. And you have to remember that, I think, when you're making those decisions, because they are important decisions and may somewhere along the line cause someone to be extracted. Now, with all that said, let's go into Episode 2. Episode 2 was basically Give Me Shelter, and it was surrounded a challenge to build a raft, take that raft across a lake, and get to the other side and collect materials to build or improve your shelter system. There was also a swap and trade in that episode that was conducted by two team support groups at the same time in the supply room, where they had only a certain amount of supplies and they had to kind of decide who was going to get what from which team. And so there was a little bit of bartering going on there. Some of that went well. Some of it I didn't think went so well. There are some things that I question and some things I would do different. And I will never say that a certain contestant did this terrible, or a certain contestant did this better than anybody else, or that a certain support group did this terrible, or a certain support group is doing better than anyone else. Because my look at this show has to be objective. And if I were running the show, there's a lot of things that I would do different. Or if I was the survival consultant for the show, there's a lot of things I would do different. If I were setting up the scenarios of the show, there are things I would do different. And we'll talk about that during this episode. So let's first talk to the raft portion of the episode. The contestants were told that there was going to be a challenge for better shelter equipment. With that challenge came a drop, and that drop included things they could use to build a raft and included plans that were provided by their support group to build a raft. And back at the base camp, before this drop happens, they are drawing up plans for how to build the raft and selecting supplies to send to their respective team member to build the raft. And here's what I would say about that, okay? And this is where I would kind of have done things different. There were a lot of very good supplies in some of those drops and in the supply room itself. There were auger bits in there. There were saws in there. There were axes. There was rope. There were everything that you would need to build a very, very nice raft in that room. There were partial oars that could be lashed onto sticks to make a full-size paddle and things like that. All of those things were provided. However, most of those things went straight out the window immediately because instead of saying something like, you have 4 hours to build the best raft possible, and when we say go, the first one to the other side gets the best shelter supplies. Instead, it was, here's your drop, build a raft, first one to the other side wins the booby prize, okay? The problem with that is all rational thought goes out the window, and now it's, what can I do to get there first? If I lash 2 or 3 logs together and float on those and swim, I'm gonna get there first. And that was really the object, was to get there first. So you have to decide, is the object of the game a build? You're trying to get them to build a phenomenal raft by giving them excellent tools to do so, and plans that are gone through back at headquarters or back at the base camp with the support groups, or are you just throwing a few supplies at them and saying, tie some logs together and get your butt to the other side of the lake because the first one there is going to get the best prize. And I think that's how it ended up. Now, with that said, obviously, some still did better than others. Some made it to the other side very quickly. One guy in particular, back to my guy Woody, you know, and I say my guy Woody because I talked about him in the first episode. They kind of left that first episode as Woody being sick on water. Well, obviously, if he wasn't sick anymore the next day, he wasn't sick on the water. It was something else. If he'd been sick on the water, it would have been probably a week to 2 weeks of him being sick on the water. So that wasn't the problem. So Woody overcame some bad things, overcame some physical ability problems, some stress problems, and things like that, and he made it through night 1. On day 2, he made it through the raft challenge and got the best prize, and now he has a bearskin rug, which in my opinion is just excellent because it's going to battle lots of conduction from the ground. It's going to be warm. If you got a blanket to go with that, and you got a nice tarp, man, you got a pretty killer shelter for only being at day 3 of the challenge. So he got a great situation there. However, there was also some really nice tarps and ropes and things like that that other people were able to get. And then you had at least one contestant that didn't even enter the water. And is that a good decision or a bad decision? It will remain to be seen. If you've got a decent shelter that's made from debris and you've got a decent fire and you already have a sleeping bag and you have fairly good clothes, you should be okay for a couple days until something else drops or something else happens or you have another challenge. But to make the decision not to get in the water, you're risking not having a better shelter and definitely not having the best shelter. So you're risking your longevity in the game. But at the same time, from reading between the lines, I think that gentleman had just learned to swim. So his confidence in the water was very low. And so he probably made a smart decision at that point to stay on land. Even though it cost him shelter material, it didn't cost him his life. And that's the situation that you get into when you got 50-degree water and you're in it for a long period of time. You don't have a good raft, so you're mostly submerged in water. And as you saw, the one contestant was uncontrollably shivering. When you get to that point, you've got big problems because nothing is going to go uphill from there. Everything is going to go downhill. Luckily, he got to land, according to what we saw on the show. He got back to shore, got back to his camp, still didn't have fire, so I had to go through the night, still damp, inside of a sleeping bag, trapping as much body heat as he could, and the next day, he finally got fire. So now, since we're talking about fire, let's talk about the whole trade challenge thing, where one team member or one support group member from each team went into a room with 6 items, and they had to decide which team was going to get what items. Now, the one thing it looked to me like was that the propane stove, which that's something that I probably wouldn't even have considered putting in the equipment room if it was me, because it's very short-lived. It's open flame, but so are matches. It's open flame for longer than matches, but at the same time, it's a very expendable resource like matches. The only good side to it is you have an open flamethrower, basically, that you could put on tinder sources and then turn it off, and it becomes an emergency device at that and nothing more. But it looked to me like matches were provided with that to start that stove. If I were going to put that stove in a challenge, I probably would have not put any ignition device with it at all. And it would only done you good if you already had matches or if you had a ferro rod. If you didn't have either one of those, the stove would have done you no good at all. That's probably the way I would have set that up if it would have been me. However, when you're trading items, obviously you're trying to get the best items you can get for your team member, and you're trying to get things that are going to help them further their situation in the game and make their life easier. And I think most people did a fairly good job of that. There were some trades that I kind of scratched my head on, but I think that there's a lot of priority or a lot of emphasis by a lot of people, and we're guilty of that even in the survival community. A lot of times I see of putting an emphasis on food. And in a 3-day situation where you've only been there for 3 days, you're not really expending that many calories until the raft challenge. Food is not the front runner of what I would be getting, right? What you want is fire, shelter, water. End of story, right? Has he got a container he can boil water in, or she? Have they got something they can start fire with that they don't have it yet? Is there something that will guarantee them fire in this pile? And then at that point, you can look at other things. You can trade for things like food, cans of peaches or a sandwich or something like that. Although the caloric value of the food that they were given is not very high. The sugar level is high in the peaches, so it's going to give you immediate energy, nothing long-term. Probably the best long-term energy of the bunch, again, going back to Woody, he gets the ham sandwich, right? The bread is full of carbohydrates. The meat's got protein in it. So he's getting better sustenance than somebody who probably got 3 cans of peaches. In my opinion, short term, right? Long term, it's going to be a different game. And if you look at the previews from next week, it looks like they're going to have to navigate to a carcass and harvest meat from that carcass, which they'll have to have some type of open flame fire to process that meat so that they can cook it and make it edible. Eating it raw is probably not going to be a good option. So with that said, that's pretty much my AAR of Season 1, Episode 2. Some things went well, some things didn't go so well. You can see that there are clear leaders right now, and you can see there are people that are not doing so well right now. And the only thing I would say and recap for myself would be that if you are in a situation like that where you're providing support to someone in an emergency, give them the best chance they can possibly have to succeed. It's not the time to say, they don't really need that. They don't really need that. They need it, okay? If they need it. If you want them to thrive, they need it. So do the best you can do to support the person that you're trying to support, and that's just an object lesson in life. If you got someone that you support on a daily basis, whether it's a wife, a child, multiple children, whatever it is, support them to the best of your ability and give them the best chance for success. And that's exactly what you're seeing on this show. Now, I think we're going to see some different things going on context-wise within the support groups at base camp as things transpire. We're going to see some, this person against that person, this team against that team, and things like that. And that's where a lot of the dramatic things will come into play later on in the season. But I wish all the contestants well. I wish all their support groups well. I'm enjoying the show so far, and I'm so glad that we provided Pathfinder branded gear for the show Extracted on Fox Network. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's available on Fox at 8 o'clock on Monday nights. It's also available on Hulu and YouTube TV. So if you have YouTube TV, Hulu's part of that package. You can watch it on Monday night as well. And it's also available on Fox if you have cable. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. I appreciate your views and I appreciate your support. I'm glad you joined me for this second episode of our AAR on Extracted, and I'll be back next week. Don't forget that we have a challenge weekly where you take screenshots from the show showing Pathfinder branded gear, and we select a person from those screenshots that are posted to Instagram, and there's rules to that on our website, and that person is sent a free prize package during the week that week. So don't forget that as well. More encouragement to watch Extracted on Fox TV. Thanks, guys. Bye.